Last year, the credit rating agency Standard & Poor increased Barrie's credit rating from AA to AA+. Barrie's Director of Finance, Craig Miller, credited the work done under previous council for improvement in the credit rating. He gave a presentation to the council on Wednesday. Miller especially mentioned the council's 2015 decision to establish a fund to contribute to infrastructure renewal. Though the fund was paused due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it still helped the city improve its creditworthiness. However, Miller said the 2023 budget process is expected to be challenging due to inflation, high interest rates, labor negotiations, and legislative changes. Bill 23, passed by the Ontario government, will have the biggest adverse impact on city's budget and will result in tax hike, reduction in services, or both. From Mayor Alex Nuttall's inaugural speech, it seems that there will be reduction in some services except for the police, which is expected to see a jump in spending. Taxes for Barrie residents are proposed to go up by 3.9% or $182 on an annual basis for the average assessed property value of $365,000. This value is likely to be far below the current market prices as the province hasn't reassessed properties since 2016. The total 2023 tax supported budget is $408 million, out of which $283 million, that is 69%, will be funded from property taxes. The city will also pull $43 million or 11% from the city reserve to fund the budget, and around 10% will come from fees, service charges, and rentals. The council will approve the budget on February 15, but before that, on February 1st, three biggest service partners, Barrie Police, Barrie Public Library, and Simcoe County, will make a presentation. And final budget deliberation will be held on February 8th.
Our next presentation is by Mr. Craig Miller, Chief Financial Officer, concerning the 2023 Business Plan and Budget presentation. I'd like to call Mr. Miller up to the microphone to present to folks in the chamber and at home.
I think that beep means I should start now. So thank you, Mayor Nuttall and members of Council. Thank you for the opportunity to present the 2023 Business Plan and Budget. So I'm here to present a high-level summary of where we're at, and then we've provided you all with two big binders for you to go home and do lots of reading over the next number of weeks. I get to stand here and give the high-level overview, but it wasn't me that put all this together. It actually was a big team across the city. A lot of the people that are here today, every department works on the budget, as well as our service partners. So it's a big effort, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank Craig Gillespie for his leadership in the corporate finance team, as well as Kelly Oakley, who plays a big part in her asset management team, helping us with the capital plan. And of course, our friends in Access Barrie, who did a fantastic job and worked very hard over the last number of weeks to produce a rather, I think, very visually appealing business binder. So what is the business planning and budget all about, really? And it's really how council and staff allocate resources to deliver on council's strategic plan. It's how we fund our 60-plus services that the city provides. So if you step back for a minute and just think about what does that entail, a lot of every day, pretty much the residents and businesses of Barrie use our services, from drinking the clean water to flushing, to doing laundry, having showers, to where the water goes down into the wastewater. We have stormwater services. You go for a walk on our sidewalks, you drive on our roads, we have traffic lights. You might go for a nice walk in one of Barrie's many beautiful parks, go take some courses or do some physical exercise at our community centers, grab a book at the library. And as you're walking down the street, you may see a fire truck. an ambulance, police, emergency services that are there for you 24 hours, 7 days a week. The City of Barrie pays or provides these services. So there's a lot that we do here at the city. So just to summarize the process, for those of you that are new to council, you may not know that we actually started this process way back in May of 2022. And at that time, we did do a memo to council where we identified some high-pressure challenges we foresaw coming up with the 2023 budget, such as inflation, high interest rates, labor negotiations, and that would be pressures that impact our 2023 budget. And here we are today on January 18th, 2023, and pretty much those assumptions were all true and real, and I think we can all agree that we are living in that environment. We had some legislative changes at the provincial level that also threw a few wrenches in our plans, but we proceed forward. So some key dates for you going forward is on February 1st, the service partners will be here to present, and it's the three largest service partners from a financial standpoint, that being the police service, library, and the county of Simcoe. And then on the following week, on February 8th, is a budget deliberation night, and we do provide a staff report for you as part of that consideration. And then on February 15th, it's council approval. So we got roughly a month to get the budget approved. So as I say, they're two big binders, and we have some, hopefully you'll have some time to start reading through them. So just before we get into the details, I would like to kind of point out is what guiding principles the staff and council use to put together the binder. And the city does have a financial policy framework which was updated in 2021 as part of a long-range financial plan. And that's sort of a framework that kind of gives us all guidelines and targets and keeps us in the straight and narrow. And then as part of that, we have financial policies such as our capital financing and debt policy. We also have a purchasing bylaw, which is really driven by contract law, but the purpose of it is to keep us on side, but also bring value to the city and taxpayers. And then worth noting that in the past, I think it was 2015, council introduced the dedicated infrastructure renewal fund, where each year 1% is added to the contribution to the capital reserves to help fund our renewal needs. We had a bit of a slowdown during COVID to keep, council decided to help keep the tax rate down. There was a bit of a pause on it, but without those decisions of past council, we wouldn't be able to achieve a lot of the renewal work that the city has done over that time. So putting those all together is why last year Standard & Poor's increased the city's credit rating from AA to AA+, which is a big accomplishment for the city. Now, having said that, there's always items to be wary of or cautious of. And while we do have capital reserves and we do contribute to them, they are under pressure. We have a lot of renewal needs at the city at the same time as we are growing, as we have been planning for this for many years, and we're going to continue to grow. We have development charge reserves that are needed to fund all the growth infrastructure, but they are under pressure, and with the current economic conditions, it's something we'll have to monitor going forward. So again, 2023 and beyond, I think this is, while we're treating it as a one-year budget, it's really, these pressures are going to exist most likely during your term of council. Just as everyone at home, residents are facing inflation and higher interest costs, as are businesses. So is the city of Barrie. When you run 60+ services, you are dealing with these high costs of everything. The other pressures we need to really keep an eye on, that we have been building new infrastructure, new roads, new pipes to support the building of new homes. With that comes operating costs as they start to come online. And at the end of the day, resources are needed to maintain those roads, to maintain fire halls. So we're starting to get that point that infrastructure is coming online, that we start to have to build up resources to support them. Another item to look out for sort of this year and next year is our capital county of Simcoe reserve. So the city has a reserve that we use to pay our capital commitments to the county of Simcoe. They do have an extensive capital plan, and our reserve that we fund with is under pressure. So over this year and the next few years, council's going to need to take a look at it, and we develop a financial strategies to making sure we continue to fund that reserve. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about Bill 23 and the impact on development charge collections, so we are working through that process. Staff are actually working on an updated development charge background study as we were directed to by the past council. And we'll be bringing that to council in the spring, and as part of that exercise, we'll have a better understanding of the impact of Bill 23, and we'll look for opportunities and develop a strategy for funding our capital needs as we go into the 2024 capital budget process. And then, of course, with the economy, high interest rates, developers are facing the pressure, I'm sure. We'll have to really monitor their amount of building that they are able to do as we have invested a lot, the city has invested a lot of money in building new infrastructure. We really need to see those homes and residents built. Obviously, there's a need for it, but also from a financial perspective, we have needs to collect the development charge revenues with that. So lots on the agenda. When I started working in municipal finance, I had some friends that say, "Why would you want to go into municipal finance? It's pretty boring." And I got to tell you, it's not. So if you do a big drum roll, as everyone's asking, what's the tax rate or the proposed tax rate that staff are bringing forward? And this is the point of this slide. So there are a lot of numbers. I'm not going to run through every single one, but just to give you a general concept, we try and break our budget into building blocks to help you to help everyone understand the pressures that we face. So we break it into the first line is maintaining service levels for city operations. So that's at our existing services. What does it cost today compared to last year? And that's what the first line on the very top there. Oh, apparently I have a pointer here. It's not pointing. But the very first line is the $8 million. And what that represents is the net impact of increases related to new contract costs, being labor, being costs for delivering of transit, waste services, those type of costs, and netted against that number would be new revenues, so new fees that we introduce. So bringing that all together, we're at 8.1 million, and the next column, the tax rate impact, represents the impact on the average assessed home in Barrie. So to maintain everything else as is, it would be 2.66%, or as I say, $8.1 million. And if you walk down the next line, you'll see decreased operational subsidy of $4.7 million. What that number is made up of, if those that were on council last year will remember, we had some Safe Start money that was given to municipalities from the federal and provincial governments to help reopen the economy up from the effects of COVID-19. So last year we had used, there was $2.5 or $4 million available that we used, brought in as revenue to help offset some of the property tax pressures. In addition to that, there was another $2.3 million that was used from reserve, from the tax capital reserve and the reinvestment reserve to help offset cost pressures last year. So now in 2023, the Safe Start money we don't have this year. And then right now the proposed budget doesn't include using those reinvestment reserve and tax stabilization funds that were introduced last year. So the impact of that's $4.75 million. We do have some reductions, you'll see. Debt management, we actually are paid off some debts that matured at the end of this 2022, so there's savings in there of $870,000. You'll also notice reserve contributions. That excludes the DERF and the County of Simcoe capital reserve contributions, so there's a reduction there of $6.6 million. That's actually part and parcel with the stormwater fee, which I'll talk about later slides. We'll now be shifting costs from property taxes onto the user rate stormwater charge. So that reduces the contribution to the tax capital reserve, as we will be forming a stormwater capital reserve to fund our stormwater needs. New investments and service recommendations of $1.3 million. So when you open up your binder, there's a section about new investments and service recommendations. There's what we call intake forms in there that describe what it is we're recommending. Again, a lot of it ties into, we've built a lot of new infrastructure, and we need resources to support that infrastructure. But the net impact on that is $1.3 million. And then the last line there is this estimated assessment growth of $4 million. So with all the investment in infrastructure the city's doing, we are growing, and some of the return on investment from a financial aspect would be more homes are being built, assessment base of the city is growing, so it's additional revenue coming into the city, and we're at $4 million. So the grand total for city operations is $2.6 million, or a 0.88% impact on the average taxpayer. The next line groups all our service partner. That would be the police, library, conservation authorities. When we net all their year-over-year changes together, the net impact is $6.3 million, or 2% on the average taxpayer's bill. And then, of course, the last line, staff are recommending continuation of the dedicated infrastructure renewal funding and putting it back up to 1%, and that results in a $3 million impact on the property tax. So you add them all up, and we get to 3.95% for an average assessed value property in Barrie. And I'm going to underline, this is assessed value. The province hasn't reassessed properties since 2016. So the average assessed value is $365,000, and that's an impact of 3.95%, or $182 on an annual basis. So that, Mayor Nuttall and Council, that is where we're beginning our budget deliberations. So just a big picture view, our total gross budget's $408 million, so this is the tax-supported budget. And out of that, 69% is funded from property taxes. That's $283 million. I won't go through all the different parts of the chart here, but I'll just call out that the second largest number is contribution from reserves. So those are our city reserves at $43 million, or 11%. So that would include, we have debt financing costs in our operating budget, and we pull approximately $24 million from the development charge reserves to fund those costs. We also have capital recoveries, so there are staff whose main jobs are to work on capital infrastructure, so their salaries do get charged back to capital projects, so that gets pulled from our reserves. But they are, I stress this, these are from our own city reserves. And then the other next item on there is $35 million, or 9%, are fees, services, service charges. So that would really be your rec fees, your transit fees, late fees, anything else with a fee goes into that bucket. And again, it's $35 million. So if you reduce any of those numbers, then any of the service fees or contributions from reserve, then it ends up increasing your tax levy number. Switching over, so we have a tax rate budget. We also have a user fees budget, and we have, this year we'll have 4 of them, but the main ones are water, wastewater, and parking. So water and wastewater, a highly regulated industry. Under water, you are required to have a financial plan that shows that you are running a financially sustainable water system. The city did approve an updated water and wastewater financial plan, I believe in 2021. The rate increases do mirror the recommendations in those reports. So for water, it's 3.7%, which from memory, if you allow me to check my notes here, from memory, I believe it's an impact of $13.75 on an annual basis. The 5% impact on wastewater is an impact of $26.54. Parking this year in the budget, there's no recommendation for a rate charge. And just quickly, we did a presentation to council in November on the stormwater charge. But again, the overall concept is we're taking $10.5 million, that's the existing service level that we pay from property taxes to fund stormwater, that's both operating and capital, taking it off the tax levy, and now we're introducing a user fee system so that the highest contributors will pay into that. Because this is the first year of the implementation, the recommendation is the billing begins on April 1st. So for the first 3 months of the year, staff have recommended that we use some federal gas tax, $2.6 million, to help with the first quarter, and also to help property owners and businesses deal with the implementation of the new plan. So for 2023, the recommendation is staff, our residents and businesses will be paying 9 months. So for the average homeowner, when it was on the property taxes, an annual charge was $174, whereas going forward, the stormwater rate, an annual charge is $129 or $10.75 a month. But for 2023, the total cost for 9 months for a resident is $96.75. So switching over to the capital plan, the objectives of our capital plan was really to produce a 10-year capital plan, which includes a 1-year budget, 4-year forecast, and a 5-year outlook. When you get into your binder, you'll find out what, and I have a slide that's coming up, I'll explain to you exactly what that means. But when we put together the capital plans, Kelly and our asset management group, and the asset management plans that she's putting together play a key role in helping prioritize which renewal projects get funded or sooner rather than later. The city, of course, has also been planning for growth, so growth management plans play a big part of our capital plan as well. And of course, financial resources. So that again ties into our financial policy framework. How much can we afford? And these are the parameters that we use. And then finally, do we have the staff to deliver? So all these go into the big mix to help our develop our capital plan, which we review every year. So in a nutshell, what council is being asked to approve this year is there's a $89 million of previously approved capital budget. So what you're being asked to approve is an additional $271 million. So the grand total previously approved plus the 271 is a $360 million capital plan. So that what that means is staff have capital approval to spend that money. And in the binder, you'll see that's from 2023, I believe, for the next 5 years. You'll also find when you get into the budget, there's also a line that's a forecast. So it's kind of forecasting out what's beyond. So we're not asking you to approve spending of that forecasted number, just to allow you to know that these are numbers that we anticipate to do. But when we ask for approval to spend it, we'd be bringing that forward next year. So big part of capital planning is putting the expenses together, and then equally the big question is how do you fund it? So as you can see, we fund our capital plan from our own capital reserves, our debentures, we use debt. We use our user rate reserves, so that would be water, wastewater, parking, and now the newest revenue source we'll be using is a stormwater user rate. Just a high level to focus on the tax capital reserve. So what this slide's telling you is the highlighted column there that says uncommitted, overcommitted reserve balance. At the end of 2023, we're showing that we're anticipating our tax capital reserve will be uncommitted, so $16 million available that has not been committed. And that sounds like a lot of money, but I think when you realize the city owns $5 billion in assets, and I think about $3 billion of those roads and that sort of thing are funded from the tax capital reserve, that's not a lot of free and clear money, so to speak. And right now, the way the capital plan's built, you can see that we're going to lower that reserve balance over the next 2 years. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. 2027, you can see it starting to go back up. The assumption is that for this to work, if the expenditures are approved, there's also an assumption that the 1% annual DERF would go up as well to help us get to that point. And just to highlight our debt forecast, so right now at the end of 2022, our outstanding debt was $306 million. We're forecasting some debt in 2023 to get us to $321 million. And you can basically see that's on the left-hand side. It peaks in 2026 and then begins to drop in 2027. What I would highlight on this slide is 59% of our debt is funded from development charges. So a lot of that debt that's outstanding, a lot of it relates to the water plant that was built, this was 10 or 12 years ago. There was a lot of work done in the wastewater plant, the sewage plant, and then we've also built first responders. There's some costs in there related to that. But a lot of the debt is past years. So on the right-hand side, we're calling out the annual debt servicing costs. So if you have a mortgage, these are your monthly payments or your annual payments. So for the City of Barrie in 2023, we paid $41 million to service our debt. And again, 59% of that is funded from development charges. The next largest revenue source to pay the annual debt is from the taxes, and it's about 13% of that total. So next steps in the budget, I've kind of explained or reminded you all. We're back here February 1st for the service partners, and then February 18th is General Committee, and hopefully passing of the budget on February 15th with Council. We have developed a process with Council, between Council and staff in past years, where we encourage you as you read the binder and come up with questions, you can email them to the budget.questions@barrie.ca email address. And the way we have handled it is there's some complexity, as you know, and you'll read through, and there'll be some complex questions, and they take a bit of time to get the answers you're looking for. So generally speaking, we ask if you can get us your questions during a week, by the end of the day of a Wednesday, then staff are going to try and commit and distribute the responses at the end of the day on Friday. So each week we'll do a release if we have questions and answers over the next 4-week period. So we have found it's pretty efficient. You have the information, we're sharing it all with you, and you're all seeing the same level of explanation. There is no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question. They're all good questions. So please ask away, and I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller, for your presentation this evening. And I'm not looking at my notes, but I'm guessing if I looked at my notes, it would be to reinforce the ask the questions and get all of the answers in advance so that we can be coordinated and collaborating both with staff and each other as we go through this process. Are there any questions or concerns from Mr. Miller here after his presentation? Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Mr. Miller. As always, thank you for putting together a really, I'll say, I'm able to understand it, and I know how complex it is when we get into this, but for a public level and also for us from a starting point, I really appreciate the layout and how you present the information forward. To that, I wanted to ask if at this point in time, I know you indicated to me that the public will have access to the budget and the binders, and I believe that's through the website you put up, barrie.ca/budget. Could you speak to the process for the public watching too about, sometimes we do a really great job around engaging the public in the budget. I think we've done that. That I think view is closed, so now it's more around following the process of council deliberations. Is that correct, or could you speak to the public's ability to follow along in the process over the next month?
So through you, Mayor Nuttall, thanks for the question. Councillor Kundal, thanks for reminding me. I was supposed to announce that the budget binder is actually on the city's website now, thanks to the team in Access Barrie as of 7 o'clock. So it is available to everyone to review. In terms of the process, the budget survey that was put out, that information is being collected and will be distributed to council. We've usually done that through the budget staff report that you'll be getting in a few weeks. Members of the public are also able to email questions, and they have in the past through the budget.questions@barrie.ca, and staff will take those questions, we'll share them with you, and we'll respond to the residents as well. and that it's an iterative process over the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Councillor Hamilton?
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Miller. I'll echo Councillor Kunkel's comments. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's very helpful, especially as a new councillor. I will hold off on the majority of my questions until after I dig into the two binders that we received this evening. But just on slide 5, you mentioned 2023 and beyond. So Bill 23 is obviously going to have an impact on developmental charge collections. I just want to clarify, because we've heard other municipalities talk, and even our own talk, about what that impact is going to look like and how that's basically or probably going to transcend into increases in property taxes. The impacts of Bill 23 have not been incorporated into this budget, I'm assuming, that will take place towards next budget. So we haven't accounted for any of those impacts at this point, correct?
So through you, Mayor Nuttall, thanks for the question. Great question. So not directly. So the impacts of Bill 23 aren't immediate. They're over a period of time with the changes in legislation. So for Barrie, based on what we've looked at, we expect to see approximately about a 10% reduction in development charges. If you blew that out over 5 years, that could be up to $90 million. Having said that, staff are working on a new development charge background study, which we're going to bring to you in the spring. We're going to have a really good understanding of the true impact. And at that point in time is when I think we'll be able to assess and develop a strategy with you on how to deal with that. So in 2023, sure, there will be an impact, but financially, I think it's more the outer years. A lot of the changes in Bill 2023, the municipalities that are being impacted that approved the bylaw last year and had large increases, those have now been capped because they can only charge 80% of it in year 1. Our last full bylaw update was in 2019, so the immediate impacts aren't as great in 2023. 2023 and 2024, we definitely will feel the effects of it. And as I say, we'll have a clear picture in the spring this year, and we'll be able to work on what that looks like.
I just have one follow-up question, if that's okay. Actually, it's a completely different question, but and I'm just looking for clarification here. So when we look at, we've talked about affordable housing and the crisis that we're facing and the shortage of rental units as well in Barrie. When you look at property taxes, is there a direct correlation between an increase in property tax that enables landlords to increase rental above the, I think it's 2.5% cap that's been placed for 2023?
So I'm not an expert on landlords and tenants and rent caps and that sort of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, if there's an increase in a property's taxes, depending on the lease that they have, there may be pressure on them to increase to recover those costs. But I'm not an expert to be able to speak to the true impact of rents and landlords. I don't know if anyone else on staff wants to take that one.
I'm only asking because I'm trying to figure out, as we start with the 3.95 as a starting point, again, what those impacts are going to be. And I thought I read somewhere or heard somewhere that when you reach a certain threshold in property tax increases, it does enable increases in rental charges as well. So I just wanted to fully understand what that threshold was. But perhaps I can take it back and look at it.
Councillor Hamilton, I'm sure we can get you that information during the week this week.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Can I ask another question? Yes.
Thank you. Through that conversation, through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Mr. Miller, as you were talking about the capital plan and it being a 10-year plan and cost cascade year over year, and in the past where we've maybe deferred the start of a capital project or delayed a capital project to outer years, with the DC charges and that whole bylaw piece coming back in the spring, we would have dealt with a capital plan. If there's significance, would council ever relook at the capital plan again, or is a capital plan's approval really only done at the time of the budget, and so we would wait again till next year's budget? Or does it allow us to relook at anything that we need to do from a risk mitigation in year?
So through you, Mayor Nuttall, that's a great question. So to answer your question, you do have an opportunity to look at the capital plan at any time. So right now in this budget, we're asking you to approve an additional, I think it was $270 million. When you open your binders and you do your bedtime reading, you're going to see a line in there over the next 5 years. In addition to that 270, there's another 780 million forecasted to be spent. And that, a lot of that you'll find is renewal works that's needed, and it's growth costs. So the impact, there's time still for us to understand, and the next budget cycle in 2024, the conversations may be totally different. If there's a funding shortfall, we're going to bring that forward to you, and Val and his team's one option could be deferring of projects, moving things out. The challenge with capital projects, and my colleagues around the table could certainly speak this better than I, is all the planning that goes into it. Once you go out for construction tender and you issue that contract, you can't turn back. You're committed. So between there are opportunities to pull back on your cost, but we do have to be cognizant of the overall financial health. So to answer your question, you absolutely will have an opportunity to revisit the capital plan. And I think a lot of the plans you'll see that are coming forward, these aren't new projects to those that have been around council. I think where we are financially and what we know today, we have enough money in the reserves to fund what we're recommending today. 7-8 months from now, we might have a different conversation before we enter into more larger capital projects. So.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Yeah, just one question, because obviously it jumps out to me on your chart there on slide 6, that maintaining current service levels for city operations is almost 8.2 million for 2.66%. Are you able to quickly highlight where you see the vast majority of the strains when it comes to having that type of an impact when it comes to just maintaining our current service levels?
Your microphone there, Mr. Miller.
Sorry, thank you. No, again, great question. And if I just advance. So it's the top line, so maintaining current service levels, so if we don't do anything. So again, I'll stress that we're in an environment where inflation is the highest it's been in 30 years. It's 8%. So those inflationary costs are in this number. So new contracts that we're signing, every business is asking for more money to deal with inflation. To deliver the services we provide at the city and municipalities, you need people. So there is labor cost in here. There was a contract was negotiated. I believe it's 2% for CUPE, and then there's the fire contract as well that's in that cost. But there are also opportunities in there. There are some fee increases in there for some of our programs to help offset the costs increases. I'd also highlight that line item has actually removed, because we're shifting to a user pay system for stormwater, there's $3 million of operating costs that have come off that line item now and will be paid for by users on the stormwater. So the impact is, it's real for sure. I would say it's when you consider our 60 plus services, it's not a terrible number in the inflationary environment that we're working in. The city there's a section in the binder, in our financial policy framework, there is a principle about respect for the taxpayer and finding efficiencies. And there's a section in the binder where we do highlight efficiencies that staff have been working on, cost avoidance initiatives that have helped keep some of these costs down. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of where we're at this point.
Yeah, no, thank you. Actually, it does highlight, obviously I knew inflationary was going to play probably the biggest part in that. But yeah, no, I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to open the binder yet to see for myself, so I'm just wondering at a high level, because I'm sure the public watching this too, that number might have caught their attention, but obviously we can see that with some other maneuvering when it comes to the budget that there's been some dramatic decreases to offset some of the increases, or else we would have seen a much higher number than 3.95, I gather. Thank you. And actually, just to Councillor Hamilton's question there, when it comes to the landlord Tenant Advisory Board for rental increases. For 2023, they're capped at 2.5. However, that still doesn't stop a landlord from filing for an appeal to if they can justify rental increases higher than that. So it is a real concern.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey, for your questions and also the information there. Councillor Negussi, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Can we go to slide 15? I'm just curious, why is a year 25's forecast debt level is lower than 24, the same as 27 and 26? I'm just curious, I didn't get the, yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, through you, Mayor Liam. Sorry, the question was why is the debt level lower in 24 than?
25th is lower than 24.
So the question is, with regards to 23 is lower than 24, but then 25 is lower than 24 as well. So why is it going up and
So
down?
there are some moderate increases in debt proposed. When you see your binder, I think we have $23 million of new debt in the 2023 budget. At the same time, we are paying debt each year. So there are debt that have been issued the last 10 years. Their principals are lowering. So then we are adding a bit of new debt to it, not a ton. So it does kind of move up and down a little bit. The general trend at this point is the hoping that beyond 2027 we'll be able to continue that trajectory down. But again, it will really depend on the capital works that are needed on renewal, but more so on the growth side, and how we fund those will determine the overall trajectory. I would point out that municipalities, we're regulated on everything we do, and debt's no different. So the province does have a debt ceiling where municipalities can issue debt. You have to maintain an annual repayment limit of 25%. You can't go over it of your own source revenues. So those would be your taxes, user fees, that sort of thing. So 25% of your total, you can't go over that to be used for debt servicing costs. Standard & Poor's would kill our credit rating if we ever went to 25%, so we're much lower than that. We actually had our financial policies have a ceiling of 20% of our own source revenues, but right now I believe we're at 11%. We'll, as staff, we'd certainly always be recommending there's a range we wouldn't go over because we are very cognizant of trying to keep an eye on our debt ceiling. So while it is a large number, it's I would say with the rating that we got last year, where Standard & Poor's improved their rating to AA+, we're still within a reasonable amount to afford the city right now.
Thank you, Councillor Negussi. Any other? Oh, Councillor Rittman.
Just following up on that question, I'm just looking at the blue bars that represent the development charge borrowing, and it's a little hard to see, but it seems to me that we're not borrowing for development charges at all, and that some of that's going to be paid off at 2027. Am I correct in that, or are we? It looks like that bar is equally long all the way across.
So yeah, you're through your mirror now. You've got great eyesight that you can actually try
I got my glasses.
kind of try and keep the scale on it to see what knows. So yeah, it's correct. If you look at that at a high level, it less of our debt in the future will be from development charges. What I will say is, last year, if you had looked at this graph, it would have went the other way. So the amount of debt we issue for growth-related projects will depend on how much money we have in our reserves. So the past 2 years, you're seeing returns happen to the city. We've had a year, 2022, we collected $100 million in development charges. The year before, we collected $100 million. But if you go back 2 years ago, we collected $29 million, and it was like that more or less since I've been here at the city for about 10 years. So $29 million, our debt servicing costs alone are $24 million on DCs. So as a result, because we've collected more revenues, we have a forecast. It's very difficult to forecast annually, year to year, how much you're going to collect in development charges because they're so dependent on the development industry and the economy. Because we had more on the books right now, we removed some of the forecasted debt because we have the reserves. In a year from now, 2 years from now, if the trend changes the other way, we may need to go back to adding more debt. So that's kind of the logic as to why you're seeing it decrease a bit. We're issuing less at this point, but again, this is before Bill 23 came along. So at this point, this time next year, we may have a bit of a different trajectory. But bottom line is 59%, almost 60% of our debt is paid for from development charges. And it's an important fact that it's really for the growth infrastructure.
Just a follow-up on that. So I take it that we are able to match, if you will, the amount of money coming in from development charges to the amount of money that we're spending on servicing or that kind of thing. Are we able to do that fairly accurately, just sort of one for one, coming in and going out? Or is that going to be difficult?
Difficult. But we will try.
Enough said.
CAO Prowse.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall, and to members of committee, council, sorry. I would just certainly remember, returning members of council will remember within the last 2 years, we were reporting that in fact we were overcommitted on development charges by about $120 million at that time. So that was a situation where we continued to invest in pipes and in infrastructure required to facilitate the growth that we knew at some point was coming, but hadn't yet materialized. And as Mr. Miller has highlighted, the last 2 years for the city of Barrie really were record years when it comes to development charges, and we actually were able to collect about $100 million in each of those years. So we were certainly, I would describe, underwater 2 years ago, and we are now at a equilibrium, and I think, as they say, we shall see what the future holds as it relates to development charges.
We're now treading water. Any other questions? I have a few, and first of all, I want to thank Mr. Miller for spending some time with me today to go over the presentation. It is obviously an important subject in terms of the budget of the city. Mr. Miller, if it's okay, I just wanted to walk through a couple, maybe slide by slide. In terms of I'll actually start at slide 9 because some of the other questions have actually already been asked. In terms of the stormwater charge, so what we've done is we've taken that off of the operating budget, out of the operating budget, and applied that based on those people who are responsible, essentially. But the first, just to confirm what you said in your presentation, the first 3 months is essentially being covered by our internal reserves. And then after those 3 months, for the remaining 9 months of the year, starting April 1st, each either business or individual will be responsible for their portion of the stormwater charge. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor Nuttall, that is correct. That's what's currently proposed in the plan.
Okay, so in terms of examples of the previously approved versus a new piece in terms of the capital plan, can you give me an example of a previously approved item in the capital plan that's, there's $89 million worth of what we've already spent essentially out of our $360 million plan, roughly call it 25%. Do you have an example of something that we've approved in the past?
Yes, Mayor Nuttall. Yeah, so the nature of capital works is it's multi-year for various things. So some of the previously approved money in there would have been related to, some of it would have been related to the Operations Center Master Plan implementation, so costs related to the Ops Center. There's also money in there related to water and wastewater works. There's also money in there for conventional transit bus replacement program. So those are previously approved. Can't spend it all in 1 year. They're all multi-year types of projects. In terms of new funding in the $271 million, you'll see it's a lot infrastructure pipes in the ground and that sort of thing. But it does include continuation of the road resurfacing program. It also includes permanent traffic calming. So those are new dollars that staff are asking you to spend. When you get into your binders, you can find there's a lot of listing of projects in there, and you'll be able to flip through them all to see what makes up those new spendings you're being asked to approve.
Thank you. And in terms of the 5-year plan here in our capital budget, the tax capital reserve balance is low, was the headline of slide 14. It appears that may be the understatement of the year. In 2024, our closing balance is projected to be about 1.6 million. In 2025, it's projected to be 825,000. You mentioned a number, which was about $3 billion in roads, sewers, et cetera, correct?
Correct. Overall, the city owns $5 billion of assets. So we fund some of those assets, the water assets, the wastewater assets get funded from the water wastewater capital. We'll now have a stormwater asset, which will get funded from stormwater. So the remaining assets, roads, sidewalks, that sort of thing are called, they'd be tax capital funded. So they'd be around total approximately $3 billion in give or take. So yes, so it's low for that amount of, so what I would just emphasize too, these are uncommitted dollars that's available.
So, yeah, to go back to that. So we have $825,000 on a $5 billion asset value. We talk a lot about development charges right now, a lot about the impacts of Bill 23, which has nothing to do with this. This is a separate issue, correct?
It is. It will contribute to it because this reserve, while it is funding our capital assets, you are required to fund some of the benefit to existing on growth projects, and that does come from this reserve as well. So as we work through Bill 23, there could be more pressure on this, but we'll address that and develop a strategy. So mainly think of this as a renewal fund, but it does fund some elements to support growth.
Okay. I'll leave that there at this point. With regards to page 15, and I spent a lot of years in finance. Still was very surprised by this. The city's 5-year plan has a total debt of $321 million in 2023. It rises to $327 million in 2027. Like, it's nominal. It's not much at all. It's not much of a change when you consider the gross numbers we're dealing with. It's a 1.8% increase in debt. In that same time period, those same 5 years, the cost of servicing debt is going from $41 million to $50 million, or a 21.2% increase. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's
Yeah.
pretty accurate. Yes, correct.
So when we're looking at the development charges on here, and Councilor Rittman had some great points. When we're looking at the development charges on here, it almost feels like a bit of a shadow game related to where it comes from. Because if we weren't paying X amount of dollars to service our debt, we're going to be building something with them or contributing them to a project somewhere. But if we see a 10% reduction in our DCs, I assume that we're going to be flipping back a page and going, okay, we have $825,000. And so I'm guessing that is a very simple way to explain the ramifications of Bill 23. In the sense that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the sense that if the DCs aren't there, we're going to our tax capital reserve. The tax capital reserve or other reserves aren't there to be able to pick it up. It's got to come from somewhere. And where does that inevitably end up being? It ends up being the municipal taxpayer. Is that kind of the projections we're talking about, the things we're hearing in the media?
Yeah, that's the theory, and
That's the theory.
in isolation, if you're not collecting the DCs. So for Barrie, it's the debt servicing costs. If you're not collecting those DC revenues, this debt's issued, you have to pay this no matter what. They don't care how you pay it, you just got to pay it. So if you don't have the DC revenues to pay it, then you've got to pay it for somewhere else.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation this evening. And certainly, just one more time to remind everybody, please use, members of the public, members of council, please use the next couple of weeks to either provide ideas, ask questions, and to get information. And I say members of the public as well as members of council, because I believe we have a very strong council. I believe we have incredibly strong staff, but we always look for opportunities and ideas that are coming from the outside in as well. So if you have any at home, please pass them on to us so that we can look at where they might fit in with the city of Barrie. Thank you again, Mr. Miller, for your presentation this evening.
That was the budget news. We will continue to bring you a budget update. Thank you.